Released in March of 2016, Overwatch took the world by storm with its fast-paced action and genre-defining and unique signature art style. In this video, our good friend Ryan Powell is going to be sharing his study of the Overwatch art style and share with us how he created this Overwatch-styled food cart environment, including modeling, storytelling, and texturing, along with a ton of amazing tips and tricks. Speaking of texturing, if you want to learn how to master stylized texturing using Substance Painter, feel free to join our latest course, where you'll learn how to create beautiful stylized textures from scratch, including anime and Studio Ghibli-style textures. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to consider getting the course. Now let's get into the video.
Hey everyone, Ryan Powell here with my Overwatch food cart scene study. This project was entirely designed to be a learning experience and to help me better understand the Overwatch style through modeling, texturing, and lighting. I'll go over the storytelling setup, my studies of why Overwatch textures look the way they do, and the role they play in a first-person shooter space, and I'll include some tips to help achieve the same stylized look. Hopefully this project can help you discover more about the Overwatch style and stylized art in general. I learned so much, though there's some things I would probably do differently next time. I'll share my thoughts on those and maybe save you the effort in your own work. I'd like to talk less about the technical aspect of the scene in this video and instead focus more on the overall methodology and thought process I use. I'll cover a few important techniques, including face-weighted normals and something fun like editable splines, but not in any comprehensive detail. So, you're ready to start making awesome art. Well, I made sure to include some crucial steps in this video, but you probably all heard them before. Gather reference. Number 1. Not just to help you create convincing materials and prompts, but also to inspire you. For this scene, I wanted to create a space near and dear to myself, so I chose Portland, Oregon as the setting. And I went about gathering tons of reference from the streets to the food carts. I referred back not just for how things look, but for where they are and what colors to use. PureRef is an excellent tool for this. Just a quick download and you're ready to go. For me, I really like to organize and categorize, and PureRef is perfect for that. You can group and categorize any pictures and references to your heart's content based on whatever metric you see fit. One thing I will say about this important stage of gathering references is don't be afraid to add things that you may not use. There is not a fire hydrant in my scene, but in the moment that was something that I thought might be important, and you never know. And so just gather what you think you might use and save it for later because you never know what might be useful in the future. Up next on the list of important things to consider when you're putting together your scene is the storytelling. And for me, there are 3 big steps to storytelling. First off, right away, you need to think about where is it? Where in the world, where in the universe is your scene taking place? And this is going to dictate a couple things. Namely the climate, what the foliage is like in this location, the color temperature that you use. Is it appealing? Is it stark? Really just generally thinking about all of those things. If you just like pinpointed a spot on a map, where is this? It doesn't have to be Earth. It doesn't have to be space. It could be an alien world. You can be very creative with this, but you do need to think about how that is going to tie into your scene, because it does really set like that first broad stroke. Up next, we have who lives here. This is the people or the creatures that inhabit the space in a very like population and general sense. This will dictate things like architecture, and the personality of these people or creatures is going to be evident in how you display this. Are they neat? Are they violent? And thinking about how that's going to be represented through their architecture, through the space, and the types of props that you include in the scene. And lastly, and this is the third step that most people think of when they think of storytelling, is what just happened. This is the bloody handprint on the door and things like that. But it can be just as innocuous as some footsteps in the rain, or a mop bucket and a wet floor, or both. What just happened is what you need to think about when you think of what has transpired in this space over the last 24 hours to few minutes. It is going to sort of demonstrate the narrative that you're pushing underneath the broad strokes of where this is taking place and who lives here, and really context is important for those types of things so they can all inform each other. Really, you want to think about them in the steps of 1, 2, 3, but contextually they all sort of run together a little bit, but it's important to kind of break it down. When I was preparing for this scene, after reference gathering and thinking about the storytelling, I needed to do some research. There are a couple things I found while looking over the Rialto map that I think are very important and apply to just about every map in Overwatch. I took a screenshot from a vista point here in Rialto, and I just took some time with it. I suggest you do the same with any type of art style you're looking to emulate. Firstly, let's remember that Overwatch is a performance game, so right off the bat, we can assume there's a great deal of assets being reused in this scene. If you're making something of your own of this size, you'll want reusability to be key. For my scene, I wasn't too concerned with the architecture, as the food cart was my baby. But for the next project, I'm very much looking forward to creating a modular kit that can achieve something like this. When we're thinking about Overwatch, we need to remember, obviously, it's a performance game, but one of the more subtle things about it is how controlled the color and value of the textures is in all of the levels. In Rialto, we can see in this brick texture that the value range stays in and around 30 to 45%. Pretty much everywhere. It doesn't get too dark, it doesn't get too bright. This particular texture was in shadow. If it was in the light, that wouldn't make that much of a difference. The point being that the value ranges are pretty close together, and so they're not distracting. If you want to create a performance first-person shooter game, you want your heroes to be able to be seen when they peek. You don't want the environment to become a distraction, to be too loud so that you can't see somebody that you're targeting. We can see here on this texture, kind of what I was talking about with it being in the light, where the normal information does create some harsh contrast between the lit areas of the brick and the shadow spaces. And you can see they've solved this problem by vertex blending in the flat stucco sort of texture over the top of it to alleviate that issue, where we here on the left we see that it's in shadow, it's covering a lot more of the building. So generally, as you go up in the building, the bricks disappear. But here they've taken the spot where you can see there's just a tiny bit of this in the light. And the parts that would be creating a lot of harsh contrast are totally blended out with this vertex painting. And here's where I take all of that research and reference gathering, and I turned it into something that was a little bit more useful for me to be able to draw out the colors that I'd like to choose for my scene. I just put a simple cutout filter over the references that I decided would probably be best to choose for the food cart and for any props and environment pieces. And I ended up getting something similar to what we looked at in Rialto with the blues and the reds. However, the cutout really does boil down the color choices in any given picture, simplifying it so that it's not quite as loud, and sort of homogenizes and averages out some colors so you can more easily choose something if you're going for a very specific color mood. That is certainly not to say that I did not try out some other colors on my food cart. Another important thing I kept in mind during this process was the KISS method, or keep it simple, stupid. This is really important as feature creep can cripple your ability to keep a schedule when working on a scene you're passionate about. It became clear to me about halfway through the project I wouldn't have time to work on an elaborate background, and I didn't have any plans to make any actual buildings, so instead I replaced the big wall I was planning on making with a single block. I did this because I wanted to make it repeatable and modular. The texture isn't distinct enough to catch your eye, and all I need to do to adjust it is to rotate the block. I can also put space between them. I made the wall too thick so I could create space for these alcoves. The bottom of the alcove is the same brick, just sunken into the ground. And I made a cross section here to avoid too many 90-degree angles, which is something that you'll want to keep in mind. Keeping it modular really does make your life a lot easier as you're building your scene. I also wanted to include elements that spoke to the broader world as the scene exists in a space, and I do have some storytelling I want to accomplish. To push the green, living feel of the space, I put in silhouettes of trees. just flat planes with a mask and colored material. Same for the construction site you see behind there. Be careful with these. For shadow and AO, they can sometimes read as flat planes, which is what they are, and you want them to read as silhouettes, not as flat objects in space. They're a color relative to the sky, and they have a subtle gradient as they descend.
Something I like to do while I'm organizing materials, while I'm working in my modeling software, is to utilize SubObject Materials in Max, which is what I use primarily to create this scene. So here we can see we have our cube-like object, and it is all composed of this one standard gray default material. If I go to Standard here and I select Multi-Sub-Object, I can create a new material that has a bunch of sub-materials. The default number is 10, but let's set it to 2. Alrighty, it started as black, which is definitely not what we want. So if we go here, we choose standard, or whatever it is that you're going for, and now it's created a new material for us to edit. And so I go here, and let's choose blue. Alright, so if we go back to parent, we can see now that we have 2 materials, and one of them is our blue material. We go here, we do the same thing, choose standard and diffuse, we just this, and let's choose this very nice salmon color. Alright, we go back to this material, we can see that we have a checkerboard with our very nice blue and our very nice salmon. This just helps me keep things organized, and really, if you go here, just select the polygons that you want to apply your material to, and now we have a single object with 2 materials that are nicely contained within their own material orb here in Max. It just helps me really keep things organized, and I don't get too confused with having 1,000 materials spread out across the whole editor. You can do this different ways, but I've found that this is the best way that works for me. And once you get this into Unreal, there will be separate nodes for each of these materials that you can apply. This works really well for those tiling textures when you're looking to keep things neat, clean, and performant. And for your trim sheets, when you need to apply different materials, maybe there's part of a texture is a tiling material for the wall surface, but you also have a sort of trim element that you're using a trim sheet for around the tops or the bottom. This is a really easy way to break that up. So when we're thinking about creating performant assets in a game and scene like something for Overwatch, we need to make sure that we're utilizing our resources efficiently, and that means tiling, textures, and trim sheets. You can't include a distinct normal map on every object and every surface. It just will take up too much texture memory. So what you can do is you can use a technique called face-weighted normals. We see here we have 2 objects. We've got our cube and our cube-like object from before. And this cube, if it's got a normal edit normals modifier over the top of it, you can see every vertex has got its normal information, and every flat surface has got those normal directions pointing. So we've got 3 for each vertex. We go over here, look, each corner also has 3 tags for normal information. Each one of these vertex are using this much normal information. Each one of these corners has 3 vertices. However, it's using the same amount of information. It looks much better, but isn't taking up any more resources than this cube right here. So why wouldn't you do it? You would. And it's really easy to do. If you pick up a script, we throw in a poly just to make this clear, and it's all going to be one smoothing group here in Max, which is what I use primarily to create the scene. If we go to my script, there, it smoothed out all of them for me. Now I've got some really clean, really nice smooth flat surfaces and nice transitions between them. You've got a script, you've got your face-weighted normals all ready to go, but you've got a surface that's just not really flattening out the way that you want it to. There's a way that you can do it manually. I recommend using this only for troubleshooting or for some really tricky surfaces, because what it does, it's going to average out the normals, and it'll flatten out a flat surface, but it'll also affect the normals around it as well if it's a more complicated object. So if you've got a flat surface that you really have a forward-facing on an object and you need it to be flat, this will work, but I would make sure that you use it with a sort of a cautious hand. So what we do is we throw an edit normals over here and go down. We can select face, select the face, it'll turn the normals attached to that polygon red, and then we can average those out. It's going to do that same thing. It's going to flatten out these normals and make them all nice and smooth. This is working out really well because it is a cube-like object with really flat surfaces on it. But you can see here this one's already a little changed, so it does take a pretty careful hand to make sure that you get the same result. The scripts are likely, depending on which one you have, doing something similar to this, just they're doing it automatically for you. But one thing to note is that they do all need to be a single smoothing group if you're using Max in order for it to work effectively. But there you go. In the same vein of keep it simple stupid, I have my blinds, which I was going to create a cube map for, but decided ultimately against it and just painted in a texture and some hand-painted lighting information. It's really up to you whether you want to decide whether or not really complicated shaders that create false senses of depth, like parallax or cube maps, are essential to you. If you understand how to do them and they work well for you, then by all means, but know that sometimes there are simple solutions that can be almost as good, and to keep them in an open mind as well. Another neat trick when you are working on something, it doesn't necessarily have to be stylized per se, but it really shines in stylized art, is you've got these signs, say for my scene, or these cans that are underneath that bench in shadow. Sometimes it's really hard to pick those up. And so what you can do is if we go here and I choose detail lighting, we can see that I've applied some emissive maps to the surfaces of some objects in order to make them pop a little bit more. That's a really easy way to overcome some obstacles with lighting in a stylized environment. If you've got a little bit too much darkness, but you don't want to change the lighting too much and you don't want to put 1,000 lights everywhere, you can add a little bit of emissive to a surface and it'll make it pop a little bit more. It'll bring a little bit more attention to it without you having to totally change your lighting setup to do that. I do want to talk about my editable spline actors. I use these in a couple of the things that I've created recently, and they're just fun. So what it is if I turn off the grid here really quick, what it is, it's an editable spline, just as it sounds. I'm not going to show exactly how to set it up. There are some excellent tutorials out there that will make it much more clear than I could in this video. But it really lets you take a mesh and apply it to a spline like you would in Max or Maya, and just put it in the editor and move it around and edit it. You can adjust a lot of things like the curve of it, the size of different distinct places, and it really just makes it super easy to do something like this tubing. So editable splines, go look it up. And lastly, something that I do want to talk about is that little bit of last polish that you've got going on. You can really create any scene and something's missing, something's not right. One of the pieces of feedback that I received big time was that everything was too clean. You can see here the surfaces of the food carts they've got some mud, some drips. Down in the nooks and crannies you can see streaks coming down from places that make sense. The signs, they've got a little bit of roughness change on top of the grunge that I put down, and there is a tiling grunge alpha that goes over the top of this material on the bricks, not the grass, just the bricks. And it really adds that extra level because everything being too clean doesn't look right. And if you look around in Overwatch, everything's got like a little bit of a grunge map over the top of it. And adding that little bit of detail is something that you really do need to do. You need to add that extra bit of, ironically, polish, but making it a little dirtier really just adds that extra bit that you need. Overall, there was so much that went into this scene, and I learned so much. Hopefully what I shared with you today was informative and helped you out with your own projects. I'd like to thank Thomas and Stylized for giving me the space to make this video, and I hope you all have a great year. Thank you so much again.